This is the OnePlus Watch 3, and with all the features packed in here, for what it costs, I think this might be the most compelling smartwatch option out there right now. OnePlus did send this out to me for review, and for the past couple of weeks I've been testing out everything that I can, from the new health features, fitness tracking, and sleep monitoring, to the more technical aspects like the battery life and connectivity. And it's impressive to see how much progress OnePlus has made with their wearable tech. That being said, progress doesn't necessarily mean this is perfect. There are still a couple things that this watch doesn't have, and today I want to go over everything good and bad. So whether you're in the market for a new smartwatch, or you just want to see how far OnePlus has come with theirs and what it has to offer, stick around and let's get into it. Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. OnePlus has really kicked off 2025 with a bang. They released the OnePlus 13, which is probably my favorite phone of the year up to this point, but now with a Watch 3, I think they're setting an incredibly high standard for themselves. OnePlus is a fraction of the size of some of the bigger tech companies like Samsung or Apple, and being able to compete with them, let alone offer a superior product in some aspects, is pretty impressive in itself, but this watch did not start out that way. The first generation of the OnePlus Watch had pretty poor reviews. It lacked a lot of features, and the build quality wasn't the greatest. The Watch 2 and the 2R made a huge leap forward from that, but still missed some key features like a functional rotating crown and ECG functionality. But the Watch 3 has addressed both of those issues depending on where you are, which I'm going to get into in a bit, but it's also improved on pretty much everything else. Design-wise, the general shape looks quite similar to the last generation with the stainless steel case, but you now have a titanium bezel around the watch face. And to me, this is one of the few smartwatches that actually looks like a traditional watch, which I do appreciate. As I mentioned, the crown has also been redesigned and is actually functional as opposed to the Watch 2, which did rotate but didn't do anything, and the general movement on that crown is quite smooth. You do get some haptic feedback as you're scrolling through screen items, which gives it a nice tactile feel. And speaking of scrolling through the screen, the display itself also has some notable upgrades. The screen is a little bit bigger this year, going from a 1.43-inch AMOLED display in the Watch 2 to 1.5 in the 3. And it got a huge bump to the brightness level, where last year it was 600 nits max, and now goes all the way up to 2200 nits. That makes the Watch 3 much more functional and easier to see in daylight or direct sunlight, and the larger screen size fits quite a bit of info on the screen and sits surprisingly well on my wrist without feeling too bulky. This is about 14mm thick and just under 50mm wide, so it is on the larger side for a smartwatch. OnePlus says this fits on wrists between 140 and 210mm, where I am on the lower end of the spectrum at around 170, but it still looks great and it is quite comfortable to wear. That screen also has a dynamic refresh rate that can go all the way down to 1 Hz, meaning that with the always-on display enabled, this should conserve a lot more power and extend battery life, which in my opinion is the best part about this watch. OnePlus advertises a 5-day or 120-hour battery life on the Watch 3, provided you have the correct settings enabled. That means sticking to what they call the smart mode and not enabling some features like breathing assessments at night or the always-on display. But if you do want to enable some of those features, OnePlus does a really good job in the UI of letting you know how those features can affect the battery life. And even if you do enable a lot of that stuff, in heavy use mode, which OnePlus defines as having the always-on display on, a Bluetooth connection enabled for 12 hours a day, doing 30 minutes of exercise, and a host of other things, this is still going to last up to 72 hours. And on the flip side, putting this in standby mode is supposed to last up to 16 days. Those are some pretty bold claims, and a big part of why those numbers are likely so big is because of the nanostack silicon carbon battery tech in the Watch 3. If that sounds familiar, that's the same tech used in the OnePlus 13 that has great battery life and a lot of newer phones, and essentially allows these companies to pack more capacity into smaller batteries. This particular battery is 631 milliamp hours, which I believe is one of, if not the largest capacities available in a smartwatch. And obviously I wasn't able to test out the 16-day standby mode claims, but that 5-day battery life number isn't far off, where I left the watch in the default smart mode after I unboxed it, and when I put it on, the battery was around 70%, and lasted over 3 days. That included things like generally using and playing around on the watch, tracking my sleep and my workouts, and I only had to charge it one time out of the entire first week. When I have had to charge it, I'll just throw it on the charger when I hop in the shower, and it goes from roughly 20 to 100% in about a half hour. And to my knowledge, the battery in here outperforms pretty much any other smartwatch. Now, as far as the actual features are concerned, I've tried to do as much as I can with this watch for the sake of this review, and I do want to prefix this by saying one thing that I like about this watch versus a lot of other Android wearables is you've got a ton of accessible data on the watch versus having to use your phone for everything. I found that when I tested the original Pixel watch, I think about a year ago, I always found myself looking at the phone to see sleep or health metrics. And while you do still need to use the OnePlus O Health app to see more advanced or historic data, the OnePlus Watch 3 does a good job at limiting how much you have to do on your phone. I've been wearing this to bed every night to track my sleep, and I can just peek at the watch where it seems quite accurate in terms of when I'm falling asleep and waking up, and does a decent job of tracking my sleep cycles. To be honest, I'm probably not the guy that you want to listen to for things like sleep tracking, because I never use it outside of testing. For me, I generally know when I have a good sleep and when I don't, and outside of following tips and guidelines for making it better, I don't have a whole lot of control over this stuff, which is why I more so like to focus on the things that I can control, like health and fitness, which the Watch 3 has been great for. First off, there are a few new sensors in here this year. OnePlus added a wrist temperature sensor, a new optical heart rate sensor, and a pulse oximeter sensor, and without getting too deep into the weeds, this all just means that everything is a bit more accurate than the previous generation. Tracking my workouts and going through all these different health metrics, I find I'm getting decent results that are very similar to the Apple Watch, and I do think some of the other new features in here are genuinely useful, like the 60-second health check-in. That feature essentially will take and consolidate health metrics into something that's easily viewable and digestible, which I think does give you a nice overview of your health. It's nice that they're bringing in things like heart and vascular health in here, and even a reference to mental health, but just be aware that depending on where you live, you might not see all of this data. To my knowledge, the 60-second health feature itself won't be available until March, I believe it is, and if you're in North America in particular, there's a pretty good chance that you won't get the ECG feature due to regulatory reasons. Not having ECG or EKG in here, I think, will be somewhat of a disappointment for folks, as will the lack of any fall detection, which isn't on this model, and I know a lot of people had wanted to see in the Watch 2, but I do think, for the most part, the Watch 3 will give you a great overall picture of your health. When it comes to the rest of the functionality, the Watch 3 runs Wear OS 5 powered by the Snapdragon W5 alongside the BES2800 chip in a dual architecture setup, with the latter reportedly delivering a 200% improvement over the previous gen. I'm not sure that I really ever felt any slowness on the previous chipset, but regardless, this does feel super snappy. Notifications come through quick, and any apps on the watch are smooth and responsive. The only app where I have felt a bit of weirdness was with Spotify, where it can be a bit janky when switching devices, and I think that's more of a Spotify problem than the watch, but I've listened to music on here with my earbuds paired through Bluetooth, performed voice commands, and taken calls with zero friction, which, by the way, this does have a built-in speaker and mic that you can take calls through, and the quality is decent enough, but the volume level is quite low, so I definitely recommend using headphones or earbuds when you can. The Watch 3 does run Bluetooth 5.2, which isn't the most recent spec by any means, but I haven't had any drops or latency issues as far as connection goes, and something kinda neat with this is the ability to use the watch as a remote control to play videos or as a remote shutter for your camera. The video playback thing I'm not sure is useful with a phone because you usually have it in your hand or within arm's reach anyway, but with photos, say if you wanted to take a photo of yourself or take your own headshot, the remote shutter can be useful in that sense. You also get Wear OS 5 specific features like Find My Device, SOS, and of course access to all your Google services like Gmail, Maps, and Wallet if you want to use your watch for payments. That works great as well, and all around, I've been super impressed seeing just how far this lineup has come over the last 3 years or so. The Watch 3 also starts at $329 USD, which is right in line with the Samsung Galaxy Watch 7 and is a bit cheaper than the Apple Watch Series 10. These companies really need to start getting more creative with naming things, but at that price, I definitely think it's worth considering. That being said, I would love to know what you guys think. Would you consider trying a OnePlus wearable, or are you already entrenched in a different ecosystem? Let me know in the comments down below. That's all I've got for you today. I hope you found this video useful or enjoyable. If you did, feel free to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more tech-related content or help me create a smartwatch that calls you captain every time you check the time, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.